First of all, he's acutely intelligent. His analysis of script is second to none, which is why he's such a favourite of great playwrights like Tom Stoppard, for example. His interpretations of Stoppard's plays are legendary.
Funniest person I know, seriously, makes me laugh every day. Pragmatic and realistic, on a professional level. On a personal level, funny.
He's an incredibly charming man, and he's a very charismatic man. And I think that's kind of a lethal combination, really. For a world where you do need to seduce in a way.
I was lucky enough to get the rights to do the musical of Priscilla. That's 20 years ago now. I put together my dream team, and Simon was top of that list.
One of the great directors of all time who completely turned around My Love Never Dies with his extraordinary production that then went around America.
He certainly had a track record in musicals, but what was more interesting to me was developing new work. A lot of people in my world said, you want to make a musical about 3 drag queens in a bus in the Australian desert, you're mad. That will never work. It was hard verging on miraculous, to be honest, and Simon was absolutely the solution to all of it.
For me, he is one of those people that you have in your career who you really look forward to work with.
I can't think of an instance where something new comes up and I don't immediately think, oh, Simon's available.
An incredible person to work with and a wonderful, wonderful director. This is a very well-deserved award.
He delivers magic. He's a magician.
Please welcome our final awardee for tonight, distinguished alumnus Simon Phillips. Presenting the medallion is Joelle Ireland, studying for a Bachelor of Arts majoring in drama and Bachelor of Communications majoring in social change. She received a Prime Minister's Scholarship for Asia and was a 2022 Universitas 21 Global Citizen.
Thank you, Dan.
Come have a seat. You have studied acting.
They say that.
You have played Romeo, you've played Hamlet. What does directing give you that acting doesn't?
Oh, the big picture. Whenever I was terrible at it, and whenever I was doing it, I was really thinking about the big picture that I was in, and I thought that might be the better way to go.
Your first musical was Oliver, I believe.
It was.
But this wasn't a planned escapade. How did you fall into this?
This was the great, I'd like on behalf of the whole audience here to thank Sir Ian Mune for my career. Yeah, he dropped out. He got a film. He was going to direct it. I was 21. I said, I could do that. Yeah.
What could go wrong?
What could possibly go wrong? Yeah.
What are the ingredients that make a good musical work?
I'd like to throw that open to the panel. What do you feel? What generally do you feel about that one? The music theatre, that kind of thing. That's the curly one, and the basket of theatrical things that you can do, because you just need to. There are so many different skill sets that have to come together to make it work. So I don't expect this is very interesting, Jack, to anyone else in the room except you and I. But it's really, really hard. I just want to tell you, nothing else has earned me this honour. It's directing a piece of musical theatre. It's very hard. You have mechanics of the stage are huge. You bring many different elements together. You've got a book writer who might not like the songwriters, who might not get on with the lyricists. You've got the designer who sees it one way.
When you say might not, you mean definitely don't.
No, not at all. In the ideal of all possible worlds, it's wonderful. But it's one of those things. When it comes together, it's a great thing.
For many years, you were the artistic director for the Melbourne Theatre Company. How do the skill sets for directing a stage production differ from the skill sets required to be a successful artistic director?
That's a good question. And you've asked some good ones. I think we'll all agree he's asked some good ones. Well, the artistic director is strategizing the artistic vision for the whole company, and it's a far more pragmatic kind of series of circumstances. But I think that it's interesting to me because there are two different models in a way in running a theatre company. Again, I feel this is quite a niche answer, but there are two different models, and one is a producerial model, and the other is that an artist runs the company who also directs, and in my case, that was what was happening. And as an artistic director who's also an artist, you approach the entire idea of making a season of theatre from an artist's point of view, while having to also say, well, maybe if we do that production that costs 300,000 over there, we might do this one that costs 100,000 over here, and you're balancing all those things together to try and make a cohesive whole, while trying to convince the public that they are receiving enough soul food in any given year that they will come back and back again to receive that energy for their heart.
Talk to us about that tension. How do you balance as an artistic director holding on to existing and, dare I say, sometimes aging audiences with trying to build new audiences?
Look, I've always thought that there is a self-perpetuating thing that until quite recently I genuinely believed was overhyped by those seeking to continually tell you that live theatre was on its deathbed. Because audiences replenish and get to a point in their lives where contemplation of life, as opposed to the alcohol-infused living of it, becomes a more interesting thing for them. So, theatre audiences, people, I am amongst the right crowd, because theatre audiences are very, very predominantly tertiary educated, because they've grown up in a world where the idea of contemplating what it is to be a human being and what it is to live life and how life is more or less meaningful, that is part of their existence. It's what they do. So they will come, they'll find their place, and they will come back to you. Of course, the place for ways to contemplate life, the opportunities for ways to contemplate life now, it's a much noisier marketplace for your options to contemplate life, which puts live theatre in a slightly different situation.
Because you started that answer by saying, until very recently,
well,
there has been this notion, and you never got round to the but part. So
there's no need to be unpleasant.
No, I was just just keenly listening. Is it your contention then that despite living in the TikTok age, where we all have this little thing in our pockets calling for our attention, and it's utterly addictive, and Simran's to blame for lots of this as well. Yeah. Despite that, theatre is as relevant today in 2024 as it has always been.
I think people still will seek out they will still seek out stories that enable them to contemplate their place in the world. I do think that they will still do that. I think that the point is that the ways of them accessing those stories now are increasingly diverse and arguably more obviously thrilling than a piece of live theatre. What theatre is doing as a result is making sure that if you go to a piece of live theatre, it is undeniably live. So, you are assaulted in the audience as many times as possible. We're trying to... I always went, well, theatre's always been that thing. It's a marvellous thing. Like, nothing you see on stage will ever be the same any night that you ever see it. Every time you go, that's a different thing. It's a different thing. It's an entirely new thing. The audience is as much part of it. I always saw that argument. In a world where there are so many experiences that are virtual and stimulate the senses in so many ways, what you have to generally do to convince people that what they're going through is a live experience is actively punch them on the arm. So that's the new modus operandi. And I'll be moving amongst the audience later.
Assaulting people.
Randomly assaulting them, yeah.
Yes, well, at least we'll know that we are living, as you say. I want to ask about two productions in particular. When you were at the Melbourne Theatre Company, I believe that is when you were involved with Priscilla. Is that right?
Yeah.
And so part of that contract, when you were artistic director for the whole company, allowed you a window whereby you could pursue that quite different creative exercise?
Well, that was just part of when I signed up to do that job, I was aware that if you go into running, the pressures of running a state theatre company of that scale means that you can kind of, in a way, disappear into the vortex of the responsibilities of that. So I made it part of my contract that I would do one show away from the company a year. So I stayed I was still working in the general.
Do you think there are lessons in that, especially for people who are perhaps bogged down in kind of administrative and bureaucratic jobs, to actually have a creative outlet, to prioritise that?
Well, I think it's very important to keep making sure that your world does not get a circle drawn around it, that you don't, that it's not only that you're not stepping out of it, is that people who aren't actively looking into it aren't looking at what you're doing. Right.
The other production I wanted to ask about is Love Never Dies. I must admit, when they sent through your video, I had a double take and said, oh, goodness, that's Andrew Lloyd Webber. Very good.
Yes, I haul them out if I need to impress people.
When Love Never Dies was first launched in London, it had fairly negative reviews, including some reviews from Andrew Lloyd Webber himself. But then you were asked to take it on, to rethink the production for Australia. How does one go about gently critiquing Baron Andrew Lloyd Webber?
That's a title, not an adjective. Well, I mean, the useful thing for me, Jack, was that he had just gone through, a $30 million workshop of his show, which hadn't worked very well. So he was ready to consider, that is an artist's. That's an interesting thing about being an artist, actually, as any artist will tell you. Like you have to have a certain kind of belief in what you're doing. And I'll just quote my other hero, it's Tom Stoppard, who said to me, when I've written a play, I'm convinced it is a work of unparalleled genius without a single flaw. And I insist on the company going through the entire rehearsal period, rehearsing it as if it was the Bible. And he said, as soon as you hit the theatre, you're ripping pages out of it, you're scrawling through things, you're changing scenes around. Suddenly the act of it going in front of an audience can completely, as an artist, completely changes your view. It's a very salutary experience to put something which you think is perfectly formed, as any mother will tell you, in front of the viewing public. And so that's what happened to him. He did that, and it went in front of the public, and the public were it was a very complicated thing. It was not necessarily about the quality of the work entirely. It had a lot of baggage. But he was ready to talk about how it might be made better. Yeah.
Right. What was the moment like when he'd seen it for the first time and you sit down for his feedback?
That was a pretty traumatic week that week.
It's a week.
I always have to be careful about forums like this where I start to tell people actually what happens behind stage in a theatrical context, because then the phone rings the next day, because there's no such thing as secrets, even between this small crowd of 600 people. Because the best thing for him and for us in the terms of that show was that he was in London and he gave the show to me and said, you can do whatever you like, but don't alter a note of the music. And then we were in Melbourne, and we put it on in Melbourne, and actually it was probably quite good, because we worked it in many various different ways and rewrote quite a lot of it in the rehearsal room, but we didn't touch a note of the music. And he came, and of course that was initially a shock for him, that there were just changes. And people of musical genius find change it's something about the mindset of the musician's brain that makes change quite a difficult thing to take on board quickly. So he was traumatized for a day, but then I have to say he openly wept with joy, man. That's why he came on the video tonight and said I was good.
Finally, I'm not sure if you're aware, but we are living in tricky economic times. Tricky economic times call for tricky decisions about priorities, about where we spend money. What do you think is the danger in a moment like this, that we as a society insufficiently value the arts?
Terrible, 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 short-sighted, dreadful danger. You know, it's Germany after the war. They'd made some mistakes. They were aware of that. And they sat down and said, how do we make sure we never make these mistakes again? And one of the 3 pillars they put up to make sure that their culture stayed free from the dangers that they just encountered was culture. And that resolve, you know, it was a fellow in Berlin a few years ago. Berlin's 3 million people. New Zealand, Berlin. $1 billion worth of art support. $1 billion. 3 opera companies, 3 orchestras, 3 theatres in one city. You know, this and the incredible richness of the human experience, and the fact that people can, as a result, therefore anyone can go, say at the right time, they can go $20 and they can go to the ring cycle. It's just a government, and we've been waiting a long time on this side of the world for governments with true visionary understanding of what that will do to a culture to irrationally support the arts. Far more than they deserve on any level. Far more. It can only pay off. It always pays off. It always pays off.
Simon Phillips, actor turned director, turned artistic director, turned candidate for... Please join me in congratulating distinguished alumnus Simon Phillips.